Jane Eyre, the end of Chapter 9 and Chapter 10, Part 1. When I awoke, it was day. An unusual movement roused me. I looked up. I was in somebody's arms. The nurse held me. She was carrying me through the passage back to the dormitory. I was not reprimanded for leaving my bed. People had something else to think about. No explanation was afforded then to my many questions, but a day or two afterwards I learned that Miss Temple, on returning to her own room at dawn, found me laid in a little crib, my face against Helen Burns's shoulder, my arms round her neck. I was asleep, and Helen was dead. Her grave in Brockle Bridge churchyard. For 15 years after her death, it was only covered by grassy mound. But now a gray marble tablet marks the spot, inscribed with her name and the word Resurgam. Chapter 10. Hitherto, I have recorded in detail the events of my insignificant existence. To the first 10 years of my life, I have given almost as many chapters, but this is not to be a regular autobiography. I am only bound to invoke memory where I know her responses will possess some degrees of interest. Therefore, I now pass a space of 8 years almost in silence. A few lines only are necessary to keep up the links of connection. When the typhus fever had fulfilled its mission of devastation at Lowood, it gradually disappeared from thence, but not till its virulence and the number of its victims had drawn public attention on the school. Inquiry was made into the origin of the scourge, and by degrees various facts came out which excited public indignation in a high degree. The unhealthy nature of the site, the quantity and quality of the children's food, the brackish, fetid water used in its preparation, the pupils' wretched clothing and accommodations, all these things were discovered, and the discovery produced a result mortifying to Mr. Brocklehurst, but beneficial to the institution. Several wealthy and benevolent individuals in the county subscribed largely for the erection of a more convenient building in a better situation. New regulations were made, improvements in diet and clothing introduced. The funds of the school were entrusted to the management of a committee. Mr. Brocklehurst, who, from his wealth and family connections, could not be overlooked, still retained the post of treasurer, but he was aided in the discharge of his duties by gentlemen of rather more enlarged and sympathizing minds. His office of inspector, too, was shared by those who knew how to combine reason with strictness, comfort with economy, compassion with uprightness. The school, thus improved, became in time a truly useful and noble institution. I remained an inmate of its walls after its regeneration for 8 years, 6 as pupil and 2 as teacher, and in both capacities I bear my testimony to its value and importance. During these 8 years my life was uniform, but not happy, because it was not inactive. I had the means of an excellent education placed within my reach, a fondness for some of my studies, and a desire to excel in all, together with a great delight in pleasing my teachers, especially such as I loved, urged me on. I availed myself fully of the advantage offered me. In time I rose to be the first girl of the first class. Then I was invested with the office of teacher, which I discharged with zeal for 2 years. But at the end of that time I altered. Miss Temple, through all changes, had thus far continued superintendent of the seminary. To her instruction I owed the best part of my requirements. Her friendship and society had been my continual solace. She had stood me in the stead of mother, governess, and latterly companion. At this period she married, removed with her husband, a clergyman, an excellent man, almost worthy of such a wife, to a distant county, and consequently was lost to me. From the day she left, I was no longer the same. With her was gone every settled feeling, every association that had made Lowood in some degree a home to me. I had imbibed from her something of her nature and much of her habits. More harmonious thoughts, what seemed better regulated feelings, had become the inmates of my mind. I had given an allegiance to duty and order. I was quiet. I believed I was content. To the eyes of others, usually even to my own, I appeared a disciplined and subdued character. But destiny in the shape of the Reverend Mr. Naismith came between me and Miss Temple. I saw her in her traveling dress step into a post-chaise shortly after the marriage ceremony. I watched the chaise mount the hill and disappear beyond its bow, and then retired to my own room, and there spent in solitude the greatest part of the half-holiday granted in honor of the occasion. I walked about the chamber most of the time. I imagined myself only to be regretting my loss and thinking how to repair it, but when my reflections were concluded, and I looked up and found that the afternoon was gone and evening far advanced, another discovery dawned on me, namely that in the interval I had undergone a transforming process, that my mind had put off all it had borrowed of Miss Temple, or rather that she had taken with her the serene atmosphere I had been breathing in her vicinity, and that now I was left in my natural element and beginning to feel the stirrings of old emotions. It did not seem as if a prop were withdrawn, but rather as if a motive were gone. It was not deeper power to be tranquil which had failed me, but the reason for tranquillity was no more. My world had for some years been in Lowood. An experience had been of its rules and systems. Now I remembered that the real world was wide, and that a varied field of hopes and fears, of sensations and excitements, awaited those who had courage to go forth into its expanse, to seek real knowledge of life amidst its perils. I went to my window, opened it, and looked out. There were the two things of the building. There was the garden. There were the skirts of Lowood. There was the hilly horizon. My eyes passed all other objects to rest on those most remote, the blue peaks. It was those I longed to surmount. All within this boundary of rock and heath seemed prison ground, exile limits. I traced the white road winding round the base of one mountain and vanishing at a gorge between two. How I longed to follow it further. I recalled the time when I had traveled that very road in a coach. I remember descending that hill at twilight. An age seemed to have elapsed since the day which brought me first to Lowood, and I had never quitted it since. My vacations had all been spent at school. Mrs. Reed had never sent for me to Gateshead. Neither she nor any of her family had ever been to visit me. I had had no communication by letter or message with the outer world. School rules, school duties, school habits and notions and voices and faces and phrases and costumes and preferences and antipathies. Such was what I knew of existence. And now I felt that it was not enough. I tired of the routine of 8 years in one afternoon. I desired liberty. For liberty I gasped. For liberty I uttered a prayer. It seemed scattered on the wind then, faintly blowing. I abandoned it and framed a humbler supplication. For change, stimulus. That petition, too, seemed swept off into vague space. Then I cried half desperate, grant me at least a new servitude. Here a bell ringing the hour of supper called me downstairs. I was not free to resume the interrupted chain of my reflections till bedtime. Even then, a teacher who occupied the same room with me kept me from the subject to which I longed to recur by a prolonged effusion of small talk. How I wished sleep would silence her. It seemed as if, could I but go back to the idea which had last entered my mind as I stood at the window, some inventive suggestion would rise for my relief. Miss Gryce snored at last. She was a heavy Welsh woman, and till now her habitual nasal strains had never been regarded by me in any other light than a nuisance. Tonight I hailed the first deep notes with satisfaction. I was debarrassed at interruption. My half-effaced thought instantly revived. A new servitude. There is something in that, I soliloquized. Mentally, be it understood, I did not talk aloud. I know there is, because it does not sound too sweet. It is not like such words as liberty, excitement, enjoyment, delightful sounds truly, but no more than usual sounds for me, and so hollow and fleeting that it is a mere waste of time to listen to them. But servitude? That must be a matter of fact. Any one may serve. I have served 8 years. Now all I want to do is to serve elsewhere. Can I not get so much of my own will? Is not the thing feasible? Yes, yes. The end is not so difficult if I had only a brain active enough to ferret out the means to attaining it.